Welcome to the Revenue Builders Podcast, a weekly show featuring B2B sales leaders and executives. Hosted by five-time CRO John McMahon and Force Management co-founder John Kaplan, the show goes behind the scenes with the people who have been there, done that, and seen the results. If you enjoy our content, please subscribe, rate, and review the show to help us reach more people. Revenue Builders is brought to you by Force Management. We help companies improve sales performance, executing the growth strategy at the point of sale. Find us at forcemanagement.com. Enjoy today's episode.
Hello and welcome to the Revenue Builders Podcast. I'm John McMahon and I'm here with my good friend and colleague, the one and the only John Kaplan.
Hey, buddy, how are you? I'm ecstatic for this segment today. Huge fan of Yeti. So looking forward for the introduction to Hollie. Hollie, it's great to see you again.
It's great to be here.
So now that you gave it away, Cap, who the guest is, Hollie started her career at GE, and then she moved to Cisco as the VP of Human Resources, a role today that I think, Hollie, people call Chief People Officer, Chief HR Officer. And then from Cisco, she became the Chief HR Officer at BMC Software, where she was in charge of global HR, real estate, facilities, government and community affairs, and employee and executive communication. After leaving BMC, she started her own executive consulting company, providing coaching and to executives from startups and also Fortune 500 companies on things like executive onboarding, organizational changes, job transitions. And she's currently Chief HR Officer at the very well-known brand Yeti. She earned her international MBA from Thunderbird University, and she serves on numerous boards, including GoodRx, Thunderbird School of Global Management, Society for the Performing Arts of Houston, and was a founding member of Caprock Academy. Cap, give a warm welcome to a friend of mine, very special person, Hollie Castro.
Hey, Hollie. Again, I jumped the gun. Johnny always gets mad at me for jumping the gun. But I'm really
can't keep a secret. Cap can't keep a secret.
I know it. I should.
He gets too excited. Hollie's always he can't wait.
In the pregame, we're for when we put this on YouTube, I got all my Yeti paraphernalia here. Huge fan of when we crossed paths back at BMC. So thanks for spending some time with us today. And I'm really looking forward to digging into your expertise for our listeners.
Oh, my pleasure. I'm excited to be here.
Cap, do you remember meeting Hollie at BMC?
I do. I can't remember exactly which engagement we had, but you introduced me to her back in the day. And then on the mainframe side too, I think I ran into Hollie again.
Yeah. Yep. She was in charge of both.
She was running around all over that place.
Yeah, for sure. No doubt. Hey, Hollie, you ready to dive in a little bit with a quick question? Well, yeah. It could be a long answer, but quick question.
Okay.
So let's talk about the effect that the pandemic had on a lot of people, especially at Yeti. So maybe you walk through some of the challenges when you were entering the pandemic, during the pandemic, and now that you're emerging from the pandemic. Can you talk about some of the challenges that you faced as a chief HR officer?
Yeah, sure. So maybe a little context would be helpful in terms of what Yeti is and who we are and how big we are.
Perfect.
Yeah, he was supposed to ask you that, but he left that part out. Okay. Go ahead, Hollie. Thank you.
Jump right in. So we're a lifestyle brand. We started sort of cups and coolers, and now we have a really broad array of products. We're based in Austin, Texas. And the brand itself is growing, and we're approaching the $2 billion revenue mark, and we're public. Wow. When I joined Yeti, we were less than 500 million, so it was private. We went public. It's been a really fun ride. The population at Yeti is about 80% Millennial and Gen Z. So really early in career, super dynamic workforce. And the culture at Yeti prior to the pandemic was really in person, in the office, and primarily in Austin. So here comes the pandemic. And from 1 minute to the next, we went from 5 days a week, all day long in the office to on a dime, everybody go home. The beautiful news for us is because our population is mostly Millennial and Gen Z, they responded so incredibly well. Like it was just from one day to the next, everybody just started working from home. And I would say it took the workforce maybe 10 days to adapt.
Wow.
So really, really quick ability to adapt. Our sales force had been used to going to Dick's or going to independent dealers and physically going out. So they had to completely rethink how they were going to sell. During that period of time, 80% of our routes to revenue were closed. So, you very quickly had to take a look at the workforce, figure out what we were going to do. We had to make some tough decisions. We had to furlough. We ended up having to do a layoff just because the world closed down on us. But because prior to the pandemic, we were already an omni-channel business, it just accelerated our movement into e-commerce. So prior to the pandemic, we were probably 35% e-commerce, and then we very, very quickly became 50 and now approaching 60% of our revenue coming from Yeti.com and Amazon. And as we moved through it, we sort of took it in stages. Everybody go home, work from home. I turned my team literally from one day to the next on blow up the agenda. And what we're going to do is focus on the employees. We're going to focus on how do we support and help them move through this period, but we didn't know how long it was going to last. It was, is it going to be a month? Is it going to be 2 months? Oh no, it's 6 months. So we really started to communicate very intentionally and very frequently with the employees. We stood up a ton of training. If you guys will remember, that was also that period of time where there was a lot of social unrest in the US.
Yep.
So we sort of had to layer in our efforts around DE&I and bias training and things like that. And then we did a lot of pulse checks with our employees. As fast as it closed, it also reopened for us. So we had to go through furloughs and layoffs, and then all of a sudden, the world reopened, and we were having to hire again. So about 50% of our employees today joined us during the pandemic. Wow. And of that 50%, a very large number of them have still never been to an office. I think that's changing now, but wow. And we just sort of walked through it. I think our employees, we did not have a lot of attrition. We did not experience the Great Resignation last year. We'll see what this year brings. But, we really tried to demonstrate a ton of empathy and meet people where they were. We had, because it's such an early in career population, we had a lot of people feeling a lot of isolation, a lot of people feeling like, oh my gosh, I've got, these 2 little kids at home and I'm having to be on Zoom 12 hours a day now. And just really trying to work with leadership and management to help them learn how to lead in that. We've had the offices reopened now in most of the world for about a year on a voluntary basis. And it was voluntary for the last 9 to 12 months for vaccinated folks. We've now, given that there's a lot more sort of openness in the world, we've now reopened the offices, and we're working in a flexible way. So our employees are all tied to a location, whether they're remote or an office. And we've tried to give leadership the flexibility to decide how they need to run their teams. And I was just looking yesterday and we had a full house. So what we're learning is people want the flexibility, but they also like to come back together from time to time to connect and be social. It's a very social culture. And we just finished our most recent employee engagement survey, and we had incredible results. 93% of our employees responded. So We're not doing it perfect by any stretch, but I think we're doing a few things right.
Yeah, that's cool. And during the pandemic, I think it caused a lot of people, like you said, they were working from home and 12 hours on, Zoom meetings and things like that. So it forced a lot of people to ask the question, why am I doing what I'm doing?
Yeah.
Which really forces people as leaders to give people a purpose, right? So can you talk a little bit about how you had to try to give people a purpose in their daily work lives to get them through the pandemic?
Yeah, I mean, the nature of what we do and what we produce, we didn't actually see a big growth pop in terms of our revenue, but what we do became really important during the pandemic. People went from, going to theater, going to concerts, doing things and going outside.
Yeah.
So, I think for our employees, making sure that we could help the world connect to the outdoors in a period of time where people were feeling incredibly isolated and the only kind of perceived safe place you could go was outside. That actually gave people a lot of purpose. I think the other thing is what we really encouraged our leaders to do is curate an individual personalized experience. So what is meaningful for one person is not necessarily meaningful for the next. And I think that plays incredibly well with Gen Z and Millennial. They don't want a peanut butter approach. They want a personalized experience. And so really spending the time to connect with humans during this period of time to understand what their purpose needed to be versus here's the corporate speak about what the purpose should be. And that, by and large, I think that worked pretty well.
Yeah, you keep touching on millennials and Gen Zs. Do you see that they're motivated by the same things or completely different things? Is there some overlap, a little Venn diagram? What are you seeing? Well,
Gen Z's early in the workforce. So I don't know that we know that much about them yet. They're just starting into the workforce. I think one commonality is they grew up with technology. Some of them were born with technology, but they all grew up with it. And so their version of focus and concentration is pretty different than I think some of the, Gen Xers or baby boomers. I take my daughter as an example. She's 18. And at any point in time, she's looking at a TikTok. She's got music going on. She's doing her forensics paper, texting with someone. And that's normal to them.
I know, but you always wonder if they're really listening to what you're saying at the same time.
Totally fair. Totally fair. But they do work, I would say, in much sharper sound bites than maybe, someone who has learned to listen for 2 hours to something. Their world is different in that way. I think the other thing that we're noticing is they watch their parents spend maybe a career or a lifetime at a place and then potentially lose their jobs with no care. And so I think they've made a decision, and this is a blanket statement that I'm not sure is perfectly accurate for every single one of them, but they're sort of putting themselves and their individual agenda first. And the faster you can understand that, and then try to have a two-way conversation about what's good for you and then what's good for the company, it's a more productive conversation versus let me tell you what you need to go do and go do it.
Yeah. Do you think because of that, there was a generation that had one job and got the gold watch and retired? Then, people had, 3 jobs, and then people had 7, 8 jobs during their careers. Do you think that the millennials and Gen Zs are going to have 15 jobs during their lives?
No doubt. Yeah.
You do?
The data says that they will have somewhere between 17 and 25 jobs during the course of their lives.
17 to 25 jobs.
Amazing.
But what I think is going to be really interesting as we watch them go along, I think they're going to completely do different careers. I think this notion that you start in one career and you have to do that career for the rest of your life is gone. So when I came to Yeti, one of the things I said is, we know you have a choice of where you work. We want to keep you here as long as we can and keep you excited and engaged. But make no bones about it. I don't have my head in the sand thinking I'm going to keep these people for 15 or 20 years. It's those days. You might have one or two, but I don't think as a workforce that is a realistic equation anymore.
What do you think is the motivating factor for most of them to make a jump? Again, you said that they're putting themselves first. I get that piece, but then is it because they're developing themselves more or changing careers into something else that's more interesting as you evolve through life?
I think it depends on where they are, where are they in their 20s? Where are they in their 30s? Different life stages demand different things.
Sure.
Social media is a powerful force. So when they perceive their peer group to be, making more money or having a bigger title, that has a huge influence on how they think about themselves. In some cases, I would say it's definitely about the work. But in other cases, I would say, we're seeing people make moves, either coming to us or leaving us, because they can just make a lot of money someplace else. Now, what I think is also interesting is as they go along in life, like anything else, the value set starts to shift a little bit.
Yeah.
As they start to have kids, they think maybe a little bit differently about the moves they would make. As they get married, they think a little bit differently, or as they have a partner, as they buy a home, those kinds of things come into play.
So Hollie, one of the things I'd like you to talk to a little bit is thinking about our listeners, and me too, I struggle with this, is that, so I'm, 59 years old, and I think about what loyalty meant for a company, for a leadership team, for people that you hire. And it's not that the concept of loyalty has changed, but how people express their loyalty, I think, is changing. And I've talked to a lot of people that are around my age and Johnny's age, and when they struggle a little bit with trying to build this culture, it's like a personal, it's a personal letdown when people leave a company. And I think it's really unrealistic now, because you said there's a whole new generation of workers that are, it's not that they're not loyal, it is the way that they express their loyalty, or what they're being loyal to has changed. So can you give some advice to companies out there that are listening, and how to really deal with the fact that your employees, just more of your employees, are gonna, there's bad things like churn, and there's all these metrics out there that people are really focused on. And I think we might be missing the boat a little bit on reality and expectations of people coming in and out of companies. I thought that was a mouthful. Sorry about that, but I've heard you speak on it before. Would you give us some advice around that?
I don't know if I have any advice, but I'll tell you what I think.
Yeah.
So I think the mindset about what loyalty means, the first thing to check in on is, what is my mindset about loyalty? When I say loyalty, does that mean no one ever leaves me? People are going to stay with me forever as a leader. Or does loyalty mean something different? I've had to work on my own mindset and become, I think I used to think like no one ever leaves me. I build a team of people that are so loyal to me, I'll be the first one to leave. And then they'll come with me. Well, in many cases that is true, but I think my mindset about loyalty has changed now, and it's more about having an honest conversation. I've said to my team, and I talk to them every week about this, somebody's going to leave. Who's going to leave? What do we need to do to re-recruit them? And this re-recruitment process needs to be frequent, and it needs to be personal. It's so hard to find talent in this environment right now. Losing good talent is it becomes the game, trying not to do that. And so, but I think there's a mindset change that needs to happen, which is people will move on, and how they handle that is the most important thing. how much lead time they give you. Have they signaled to you? Are you surprised? Are you like blown away? But my mindset has changed around how long people will actually stay. Used to be like, they're going to stay with me forever and they're going to follow me forever. And I don't know if that's necessarily true anymore.
I've also heard you say about the leavers, if that's not a really good way to say it, but about the employees who decide to leave. I've heard you give the advice that says how you leave can be just as important as what you've done while you're there. So we have a lot of listeners that are in the middle of transitions, and could you give some insight around that thought process?
Yep. It's something that I really believe in. How you leave is more important than actually everything you did, because it's the only thing people will remember about you. Mm-hmm. So are you honest and transparent? Are you having authentic conversations? Are you putting a good plan in place that leaves the organization, your team and the organization in the best possible stead possible? Are you making the conversation about you, or are you making it about them? It needs to be about them. It is not about you. It is about who you leave behind. You've made the decision to go on and you're going to do great and it's going to be wonderful. But those people that you're leaving behind, they have an experience of that. I've really tried over the course of my career, and I have not gotten this right every single time. But when I leave now, anytime, just really trying to be really mindful and thoughtful and intentional about the legacy I leave behind. And I think if you can learn, it doesn't matter where you are in your career. I said this to my daughter the other day. Okay, so at some point you're going to quit a job. And when you do that, how you do it, which hill you decide to take. Are you going to be a pro or are you going to be a loser? You've got a decision. You can personally, no matter how they react, you can personally make that decision for yourself. And what I find is the other thing people underestimate is how small the world is.
Yes.
I get probably 10 to 15 front door and back door references on any given week. Hey, do you know this person that you worked with 20 years ago, 15 years ago, 5 years ago? People get those calls. And so how they remember you is important.
Yeah. And Hollie, now we touch on recruiting a little bit? Because you talked about, people are constantly going to leave. There's the millennials, the Gen Zs. Are you doing it? And people will surprise you. Like Johnny has a saying that, someone's going to get demoted and they could leave. Someone's going to get promoted and they could leave your team, and somebody's going to surprise you. It's Johnny's rule of three, which is very true. So is there anything special that you're doing at Yeti in your, recruiting process or recruiting profiles to be able to attract people and hold on to those people?
Yeah, so the pace of recruiting has sped up. We're in consumer, but we attract and we lose talent to tech. Because we're in Austin, a lot of the people that I'm hiring are out of tech, and when we lose people, they frequently go to tech. So we've tried to get very efficient with our process. One of the things I tried during the pandemic that we've kept since the pandemic is team interviews. It took a little bit of work to get the teams working really well together. But what we were hearing from the candidate is, you guys have a really intense interview process. We have to go through a lot of people. And my response to that is, yes, every hire we view as precious. We're not a very big company. So we want to get it right, because when we don't get it right here, it's you feel it. Somebody comes in, they stay for 6-12 months and then they leave. It's a problem. So especially senior folks. So what we were hearing from candidates is, I have to go through 10, 15 interviews. It's grueling. It's awful. And I was like, okay, how can we make this more efficient, but still get what we need as a company? And so we started doing these team interviews. So now a candidate goes through maybe 6 or 7 interviews, but we've got pairs and the teams work beautifully together. So we worked on that.
Before you move off that, can you talk a little bit more about that? My son just went through an interview process successfully, which was awesome, but he was It was a panel interview. It was in data at a large bank, and it was a panel interview. And I don't think he was prepared for. It was a great outcome, thank God. But I don't think he was prepared for that. And I'm not always sure that the people on the panel are always prepared for what their role is. So I love what you're saying is because it takes us too long to hire people too, and especially in this at Force Management in this era that we're in. But could you talk a little bit more about like more of the mechanics around putting the right people on the panels, making sure people understand their roles? We got to vet the person through the process, but we also have to recruit them in the process of that. We got to sell them a little bit. We got to vet them. What advice do you give companies? I love your advice about putting more people on an interview because it'll speed it up. But what advice can you give about role definition, who's doing what when, and to get a great outcome? And to the interviewers, how do they prepare to be the interviewees? How do they prepare to be the best candidate in that process?
Yeah. So on the company side, one of the things we implemented during the pandemic, which we will keep forever, I love it, is we pick the panel and we pick the pairs. So we're really, really intentional about who's on the panel and who's in the pairs. Then we have a briefing and everybody has to attend it. And the hiring manager, we sort of interview the hiring manager out loud in front of the group and get the group asking questions. Also, which companies do we want to target? Where do we think, which profiles should we avoid? All the questions that when you read the job description might be in there, but might also not be in there.
Yeah.
The other thing we're looking at is as we look at the team and we have this one role, what are the skill sets that we need or capabilities that we need to balance out and round out the team? So we're really trying to look at that. And then we encourage the pairs to get together. Who's going to open? Who's going to close? What's really interesting is we spent a lot of energy trying to make sure they understand you have to make the candidate feel comfortable. Remember, for us, they're also our customers. We want them to go buy a lot of Yeti product, right? So if they have a crappy experience with us in the interview process, they're not only are they not going to be happy about either the job, but they also might not buy from us anymore, which is problematic for us. So we want everybody who comes through here to have a good experience. And so we've given them very specific instructions about how to chunk their time. We found that 45 minutes for a pair is too short. Some pairs want an hour and 15, but usually it's about an hour for two people. We don't do 3 or 4 or 5 on one because we don't feel like we can create a good experience for the candidate. So we're pretty swift about getting those stacked and pretty intentional about who goes first, second, third, fourth, fifth. And then at the end of the process, we do a debrief with the whole interview team where we get, and every single person has already submitted their feedback. We give an executive summary of what the feedback is, and then each person talks. It's not a consensus, but what I would tell you is the quality of feedback that's come back for every single hire. Now, I think if you're hiring 10,000 people, it's different.
Right. We're
not hiring 10,000 people. But, we're hiring 1,000, it's not a small amount. That's working. That's totally working. And then I would say one of the big challenges right now is if we physically need somebody to move, candidates are less willing to move right now.
Yeah.
And so having a lot of thought up front of, can we have this remote role be remote? Who do they have to collaborate with? How frequently do they have to? Setting that up front so that we don't get surprised at the end. And the other thing we're testing along the way with every single candidate is, what are their expectations around comp? Have they talked to their spouse or their partner? Are they on board? At some point many times in the interview, we stop recruiting the candidate and we start recruiting the spouse or the partner. And we're really laser focused in, what does he or she need? What do they need to get comfortable? If we're asking them to move, what do we need to know about the kids if they have kids? Do they have any special circumstances that are important? Like, that seems like a lot of care, but that's what's required right now.
Yeah.
And then how about sorry, Johnny.
Sorry, just going back to the interviewers. Do they know specifically what they're probing for? Or this person's going after skill set, this person's going after experience, somebody's going after knowledge or characteristics?
Yeah, so we give them.
Know what avenues they're going down, or is they just
No. We're actually quite intentional about that. So our values are embedded in our sort of career competency. Each team is given a competency that they are supposed to test that align up to our leadership competencies. So we've embedded that all the way through. So they're really intentional about, I'm supposed to test for this area. Now, I would tell you the more seasoned recruiters or interviewers, they're testing for their competency area, but they're also testing probably for many of the others. And you see that when they come. The other thing that we've done is newer leaders, we tend to pair them with more seasoned interviewers.
Smart.
So like I have a newer leader on the executive team right now, and this person hasn't done much executive interviewing. We're pairing that person with somebody who's a little bit more seasoned. And I think it's a good way to teach and learn.
Completely.
How about for the interviewee? Advice, insights, trends that you're seeing that could be helpful for interviewees to stand out in this environment today?
One of the things I'm noticing right now is I think this is a product of the pace of how much volume there is out there for candidates. People are coming to the table ill-prepared. So it really stands out to me either when somebody's ill-prepared or when they're really prepared. And so when I tell someone to prepare for an interview, it is like 360. You go, if they're public, you go pull all their financials, you read their proxy, you understand how they compensate, you understand how their competitors are. If you can go do a demo, you go do the demo, you get your interview schedule in advance. Look at every single person, go look them up on YouTube, on Facebook, on Instagram, on TikTok, if that's where they are. See if they've got get a feel for who you're going to be meeting with. The number one thing I can say right now is I'm finding candidates presenting fairly ill-prepared.
Wow. Incredible.
And do you have in your sourcing, there's a bunch of debates about, Johnny and I have conversations all the time about how we used to feel if we were the hiring managers, we owned the recruitment process. And we very much respected what your organizations did, what people organizations and talent organizations did. But at the end of the day, you own it.
Yep.
Give us some insight because you're also talking about preparedness. And so there's this sourcing of candidates and there's this bringing people to the table, and how much do you point them in the direction to help them from a preparedness standpoint without giving away answers and that type of thing? First question I want you to answer is your views on who should own it. And I really want to hear everybody else we talk to outside of your organizations. They always say the sales leaders should own it or the department leaders should own it or what have you. Give me your insights on who owns the hiring process in a company.
Well, my answer is probably going to sound really simple. At the end of the day, the person is coming to work for you. They're not coming to work for my team. So my team's job is to create a world-class process that enables both the hiring manager and the candidate to find a good match. But they're coming to work for the hiring manager. So the more the hiring manager owns it, the best examples I would give is when a hiring manager is like, what about this profile? What about this profile? They're spending their own time sourcing their network, sourcing LinkedIn. So, I met this person at a conference or I met this person on a plane. Those are the hiring managers, in my opinion, that own it the most. I think the hiring manager owns it, but that doesn't let the HR or the people organization off the hook. They've got to deliver a good process. I think the advice that my team can give is a very good sense of what's happening in the market, what we're seeing from a comp standpoint, what we're also seeing in terms of dynamics. They can be good coaches to how a hiring manager positions information. And frankly, sometimes they can be a buffer, because what isn't very fun for the hiring manager is the first engagement with their hopefully new employee is this horrible negotiation around money. You want to see, especially if they're in sales, you want to see that they can negotiate, but at the same time, that just doesn't set the relationship off to be the best, in my opinion.
That's a good point. Hey, Hollie, do a little transition here, if that's okay, Cap.
Yeah, please, buddy.
Recruiting. You're in charge of ESG at Yeti, right? That's what I read. And so first, can you educate our audience on what ESG is?
Yeah.
Because I think some of them actually know, and actually some think that they know, and some probably don't know. And then why companies are concerned with their, ESG reputation.
Yeah. I mean, ESG is the new sort of acronym for sustainability, or CSR. So ESG is environment, social, and governance. And the environment piece, it depends really on which company you're in. This may be a bigger or smaller piece of the work. If you're in an energy company, obviously you're producing energy and oil and all that. That's going to be a big piece of the work. Social, especially in tech, is a big piece of the work, and that has to do with diversity, equity, and inclusion. And the thought there is that the more diverse and equitable the environment, the better business results. I still think that there is a lot of work investors are doing to prove that out. And then governance is how the company is governed. What does the board look like? How is the company governed, both by the management side as well as the board. The reason you're starting to hear this buzzword, if you will, more investors have actually started to take some pretty strong positions about where they're going to invest as it relates to ESG.
Yes.
And I think that has sort of moved the priority up. I think there's also a lot of concern about what's happening on the planet, and how fast or slow we are moving to remedy some of the issues. ESG at Yeti is new. So the good news is we've kind of been doing it for a long time, but we are new in a formal way. And so we build durable products that are sustainable, and that's pretty awesome. But we're really new on our journey. We produced our first ESG report just this last year. We set goals out to 2030, and we were really intentional about how we went about it. The executive team spent an inordinate amount of time deciding on the goals. So it wasn't sort of lip service. There was just a huge amount of focus and influence on how we were going to get to those goals. Were they goals that we could achieve? In some cases, I think you've got companies setting goals and the leadership team doesn't have any intention of actually being there. So we were really, really intentional about saying, okay, let's set goals that are aggressive, but also achievable, that we know whether we're here or not can be delivered on. The other thing I think is really interesting about how we go, we do a lot less talking and a lot more doing, and then we talk about it. So an example is when I started in 2018, 20% of the leadership as well as the workforce, 20% of the leadership force was female. Very quietly, we just started doing the work. And today, nearly 50% of the leadership team is female, and 50% of our board is female. So we didn't talk about it. We just did the work.
What is that work? Because it's so, it has to go beyond, but those are results. Like, especially when you're on DE&I, the more immediate results, and plus the demographic of the people that you're recruiting, from what it sounds like, 85% of the people that you're recruiting, they're going to care about the answers to ESG and DE&I. How did you go about doing the work on the DE&I side, diversity, engagement, and inclusion? and to get those types of shifts in metrics?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing we did is we sort of had a two-prong approach. One, who do we have inside that we need to develop and grow? And so let's go focus on those folks. And we did that. The second thing was every single candidate slate must be diverse. Like there's no ifs, ands, or buts. I'm not saying the outcome has to be diverse, but if we put no diverse candidates in front of hiring managers, guess what they're not going to do? They're not going to hire diverse candidates. So put diverse candidates in the hiring slate. And then what you start.
How do you get, sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you. I have so many conversations around this. Many times the hiring managers, if don't have access to pools of diversity or what have you, then we say, go get candidates that are diverse, and people's networks may or may not be diverse. What great advice or insights or feedback do you have on how do you go get access to those diverse candidates?
Yeah, there's a few technologies that are really helpful. We used a technology called Eightfold, which was great in terms of helping us think about, just a scraping technology to help us look at pools. And we just really laser focused our recruiting team on all of the different places in LinkedIn, as well as educational networks that you can find diverse candidates in. So, it's not without effort, but that's how we focused our teams. And then one of the things I notice is when you start to bring in more diverse people, they start to bring in more diverse people.
Yeah, no doubt.
So when you start at the leadership level and you start really working it there, it has a downstream effect. It's a very natural downstream effect. The other thing that happens is when your team starts to look more diverse, people can see themselves there. And so they want to come to your environment.
Great advice. Thank you.
And Hollie, I know that there's ESG, there's actual mutual funds now that just invest in highly rated ESG companies. Does every company get an ESG rating?
I don't know that every company, public companies definitely do, because there's a couple of rating agencies. There's 3 of them actually that give you a grade. The investment community is starting to look at that more and more for public companies.
Right.
On the private side, I think it's really more dependent on who the investors are. But I think it's something that over time companies are going to have to focus on. I think the interesting moment we are right now in time is setting goals and reporting on those goals in a tangible way that isn't inaccurate. So setting goals that are doable and then not fudging the results. Like the results have to be, they have to be real. Yeah. And there's a lot of press out there for some companies that have published results that they can't back up.
Let's talk about Yeti as a brand. I mean, it has a big name. You say Yeti and people know it. And so what do you think and people love it. So what do you think drives that love for the Yeti brand? Can you give people some insight on that?
The way we've gone about building this brand is really interesting. And you have to kind of, when you're inside, when you come in, especially if you're not from this industry, you have to spend some time being a student of how did they do this? And it's a depth and breadth strategy that took time. So when they built communities and ambassador communities across different pursuits, they did it in a really thoughtful way. So they went sort of authentically deep, and you pick the hunting community, the fishing community, the skate community, the barbecue, and the there's a whole new sort of set of communities that are focused on cuisine and cooking over fire. But those relationships are built over time with those ambassadors. We get to know them really, really well, and they tend to be amazing experts in their field.
Of course.
What's really interesting about how we built these communities with our ambassadors is they're willing to do amazing things for us. So the example I would give you is when we were going through you remember all of the horrible things that were happening in the Asian community around hate and hate crimes. We asked 6 of our ambassadors to get on a panel in front of all of our Yetisans and just talk about their experience of being Asian. And they were willing to give us an hour, which just brought, it's just brought that in-house, that thing that we're doing outside. Yeti's kind of a humble brand. We don't go out and do a bunch of Super Bowl ads. That's just not how we go about it. But the stickiness that we create in the communities where we sell, and that's just sort of proliferating, has been, I think, really a big, powerful part. And then we do things that are unusual, like we make Yeti Presents films that are really interesting. So it's a multi-pronged approach to how they built the brand, or how we've built the brand, and it's evolving. I said when I got here, there's no women in your imagery. It's all a bunch of guys, and now you see a lot more females, which is really cool. And you're seeing a lot. I think the diversity has been there, but now we're really seeing it in terms of our ambassador community of all races and ethnicity and genders.
Yeah. And Hollie, what's interesting, you've been in mainly B2B companies for a long period of time, right? And now
this is my first B2C.
Right. So you switch into a B2C. Is there anything that stands out, or a couple things that stand out as like, wow, it's completely different in this B2C company than it was in all the B2B companies?
Well, when you go to a cocktail party, sometimes they don't know what you do if you're in a B2B company. When you go to a cocktail party and you're with a company like Yeti, they know it and they have an opinion about it. So I would just say, the sort of incredible reach of people that you would interact with in just everyday life in a B2C company, it's just bigger. And so, for me, that gives me a tremendous amount of pride in terms of, I work for a company that puts amazing products out into the world and takes a lot of care. And that is a little different than when you're in a B2B company. Yeah.
But the way in which you manage internally and even externally, those types of initiatives, they're pretty much the same, whether it's B2B.
Yeah, they're very, very similar. I think your social strategy on a B2C company is probably a little different, how you're dealing with social media. And not to say that you, on a B2B company, you may have a social strategy as well. It's just your audience tends to be a lot bigger when you're B2C.
Yeah.
Hey, so, I have a...
go ahead, Cap, go.
I have a... you have great experience in your career background. When people are thinking about their career backgrounds, I heard you talk about this on a podcast. I'd like to just spend a few moments talking about your advice around career pathing and advice. And you said, when you're unhappy, look within before you look outside to really understand what motivates you. Could you, so there are, we're talking about a lot of different generations. We've talked about that today. We've talked about things that are important from a culture perspective. Speak to us as if you're giving advice to, your children or your best friends or what have you. How do you own your own career today?
The first place I have people start is what are your values? Do you know what your personal values are? What makes you tick? And when they're out of alignment, like what's happening? Like if you don't know what those values are, that's the very first place to start. And I always encourage people to write them down. Don't just keep them in your head. Everything I do, I say, write it down. You don't have to share it with anybody. It's just for you. So know your values. When you're thinking about making a change, be very clear about what you're going toward. What are the conditions that need to be present versus what you're going away from?
Great advice.
If you can get clear about what you're going toward, the more clear you are about the thing you're going toward, the better probability you'll have of landing that. In my experience, careers aren't linear. Sometimes things show up and you're like, oh, I don't know, this is kind of risky. Do the assessment of your calculated risk, but sometimes the most unorthodox thing that shows up will be the thing that is the best growth for you. And I think sometimes, especially earlier in career folks, they're looking for this really linear path. And, you go A and then you go B and then you go C. Sometimes that works. But I would say in today's world, that's less and less. So be open to things that might not be linear. The other thing is, and I personally can speak to this, sometimes we're so ambitious and we want to keep going. So, going up, and the best move sometimes can be to go sideways, to make sure that you've got the skills that you need so that you can catapult and go up. I skipped a couple of spots in my career because I was ambitious and I wanted to move up. And I regretted that. Today, I think I've gotten to the place where I don't regret it anymore. But I spent a lot of years trying to staff around my gaps because I skipped some 2 or 3 really pivotal experiences in my discipline, in my craft. So I think sometimes taking a side move to get a certain set of skills is really important. And I think that's getting lost a little bit in this. I want to move up and I want to,
Are there opportunities too, Hollie, for this concept of job crafting? A lot of times I talk to people and they're like, oh, I'm gonna leave this company because of what I'm not getting in this company. And I always ask the same question. I ask, well, are you sure you can't get it in your current company? It's like, no, it's not a part of my job. And I'm like, do you have the ability, with the way the workforce is today, do you have the ability? I don't know if is it still a topic called job crafting, or where you have the ability to kind of influence, where if you're a valuable enough employee and there's some skill sets or things that you want to get, that you have the ability to go to your employers and say, this is what I'm looking to kind of get. And I feel like I have to leave the company to do it. Is there an opportunity? Talk to me about what the reality is. That still is that still real today?
Absolutely. I mean, my experience is great people. What happens with people that are really good is an organization will tend to want to give them more, whether it's in their job description or not. Yeah. If that's not happening for you and you want that and you want to still stay at the company, make it known. I always say nobody cares about your career as much as you do. I care about everybody's career at my company, but nobody cares about it as much as you do. And so if you don't go talk about and advocate for what you want in a diplomatic and respectful way, don't, my advice is, honey's better than vinegar.
Without entitlement.
Yeah, without entitlement.
Yeah.
But you have to make it known if you're looking for certain things. I mean, I remember when we were talking about putting ESG in place at Yeti, and I went to the CEO and I said, I have a lot of passion about this and I want to lead it. And he was willing to give me a shot at doing that. And I think it's turned out well. But if you don't make your intentions known, they can't read your mind.
Yeah. I think a lot of times people too, Hollie, have to be really self-aware. Like part of it is writing your values down, but another part is, what do people say about you when you're not around? Like, what are your positive behavioral traits, and what are some of the behavioral flaws that you have that you need to get better at or cover for? And I find a lot of times, especially younger people, they're not so self-aware of what their positive and negative behavioral traits are.
I totally agree with that. And I think the other thing is be mindful of your ambition versus your constitution. So I'm experiencing this right now with a number of people where they have these huge ambitions, but they actually don't have the constitution to do what they say they want to do. Their makeup, their DNA. They're not going to make it there, in my opinion. And so just being that doesn't mean you're a failure. It means there's probably a different path for you. So figuring out which path is where you're going to find your joy and where you're going to be really good. I think that's that self-awareness is so important. I always tell my daughter, go where you're loved. I think a lot of times we want to be in something. We think we want to be in something, but that might not be the place that is where you're gonna enjoy yourself the most and you're gonna do your best work.
Right. Sometimes it's a title, but you don't know what does that person actually do in day-to-day operations in that title, right? Sometimes I give examples like firefighters. Okay, they're paramedics, and policemen are doing domestic abuse and traffic lights, And like I have a friend that does audio and video company, but he pulls wires. I mean, so you have to really ask yourself what's behind that title and what those people actually do on a day-to-day basis. And is that something, to your point, that I have the constitution to do? And sometimes as you go up the ladder, wow, there's a lot of confrontations. Every day seems like somebody or something is confronting you. And a lot of times people don't have that constitution to be able to be in those battles day in and day out.
Yep. Yeah.
I love Johnny. There's so many golden nuggets here, man. I'm trying to
Hollie's
go through
amazing. I told
She's
you.
unbelievable.
Yeah.
Oh, you guys are too kind.
No, we've covered so much ground. Do you mind if I do just a quick summary and then then see if I left anything out? We began the conversation really kind of talking about the pandemic and your response to that. I want to attach another reference that you made to the things that you did that we didn't really get a chance to talk about, but your software background allowed you to apply Agile to the pandemic problem. And you actually brought in the concept of, like you're writing code and an Agile process for the pandemic. I thought that was awesome. You talked about 50% of your current employees joined during the pandemic. That's a phenomenal, when I think about that, that is an unbelievable statistic in so many ways, like your ability to get people to work, your ability to bring people on quickly, especially during that time, I think is just amazing. Talked a little bit about return to work, and that I think the reality is I don't think there's any absolutes right now. I get a lot of people asking me questions about, hey, John, do we just make it an absolute? And I say, well, I don't think so. I think you're going to have to figure out what the culture best supports and what's needed. And I thought you gave some great advice on it's probably being flexible in these times and figuring out what the new dynamic is. You talked about people want flexibility, but they also need the social aspect. We found that that's the biggest challenge of remote work, remote delivery, remote interacting with our clients. People are digging sometimes the ability to be remote, but they're definitely not digging the lack of social and camaraderie. So I thought that was a really cool topic that we talked about. You talked about in the curating a personalized experience at work. I know that we do that with our customers, but I like your point of view that said you have to do that with your employees. It's just as important to do that with your employees. Johnny and I are both kind of blown away with this 15 to 20 probability of 15 to 20 jobs on average of new people coming into the workplace. And we talked about how loyalty is kind of redefined and how you leave is more important than what you've done. And you talked about the world being a very, very small place. Loved your concept on team interviews and purposeful pairs and role definition and your interview process. I think this is one that people really get messed up, Johnny, is the interview process is a walking audition for your culture. How you interview people is going to give them really, really good insight into what it's going to be like to work there, or it should. It should be.
It should.
And then you talked about just preparedness. Good advice. If it's been in print, you should have expected to have read it. If you're going to interview for a company, look up your people you're interviewing with. There's so much access to information about people in social media, LinkedIn. I loved your advice for hiring managers. They're coming to work for you. Use the people organization for process and insights and buffers and those types of things. But nobody should care about it more than you as the hiring manager. I'm still going here, so give me some time here.
Well,
Brand ambassador.
Great, it's great.
Hang on, brand ambassador. I'm raising my hand. I might not be on the diversity side, but we can figure something out. I know it. I want to be a brand ambassador for Yeti because I love the products. I loved where you talked about really specifically, make sure you're running to something in career progression versus away from something. Your thought process is about being excited about what you're going to, not being more concerned about what you're leaving. Life isn't linear. These jobs aren't linear. Sideways is sometimes a great opportunity for you to gather those skill sets. I thought that was really, really great advice. Be mindful of your ambitions versus your constitution.
That one I loved.
I'm writing that one down, man. I hear a lot of people
stealing that one. It's
Johnny. The people that run around, they rally the flag. I've done it myself, and I care so much about something. Yeah. And then when I actually think about my own constitution to go make a change in that, it's kind of like be the change that you want to see in the world, Holly. And if you want to start with yourself there.
Yeah, you're really up for it.
That's what I heard you say. I loved it. Setting goals that are doable on the ESG and DE&I. We could have a whole another podcast with you on that. I think companies are really struggling with this right now. My company went through it. It was not easy for us. It was so related to the culture of the people inside the company, not just what we were saying to the outside world. It was what we were also saying to our company, and making sure that everybody was a part of that. Johnny, what did I leave out?
No, you did a phenomenal summary. Phenomenal.
Wow.
There was there's a lot of nuggets there, and
so many good nuggets.
It was awesome.
All right, what I'm going to do, if you're up for it, Holly, can I just take you through a little fun, little rapid fire, and then Johnny's got a more specific question that we want to give you an opportunity to speak to our listeners about. But I'm just going to go through just a quick little rapid fire that's just some fun questions. Are you ready?
Yep, let's do it.
Ideal day off of work.
Okay, this is not going to sound super interesting. I lived in Italy for almost 6 years. So my ideal day off is cooking all day, an amazing meal for my loved ones and my friends, and then having, an amazing meal. So it'll be, homemade pasta with ravioli and a 12-hour sauce and antipasto and things like that.
I love that.
Where did you live there, Holly? Where'd you live?
Florence and Rome, primarily.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, Johnny and team stuck. I can't say that. I can't say where I lived in Europe because I don't want to alienate anybody. So I like where you went. I'm going to stop it at that.
By the way, I think, Holly, you can speak you're fluent in 5 different languages, right?
That's your education background too, though, isn't it? You have don't you have specific something in language studies?
Yeah, I have an undergraduate in something super useful, simultaneous and consecutive interpreting of French and Italian.
I had that written down, but I didn't know how to ask you about it.
If you want to be an interpreter, that's really helpful. But I was young when I got my degree.
That's awesome. Can we say favorite meal is probably around the pastas and antipastas and.
I don't know. I'm married to a Brazilian, so churrasco's kind of on the menu usually at our house as well.
I'm so uneducated. What is that, churrasco? What is that?
Oh, it's a Brazilian steak. It's a special they prepare steak. Yeah.
I'm in.
So awesome. I have a lot of favorite meals. We're foodies.
Awesome. Favorite movie?
Matrix. On so many dimensions. We
haven't heard that one, Johnny. I like that one.
I love that series. It's old, but it's great.
Best concert you've ever been to?
So many. U2 when I was in my teens.
Ooh.
And then Peter Gabriel at Madison Square Garden was amazing.
Wow.
I recently saw Billie Eilish with my daughter. She was incredible. So I have a lot of concerts that I love. We love music in our house. So
those are fantastic. Those are fantastic. Johnny, bring us home on the charity, please.
How about a favorite charity, Holly? Anything that you feel you want to mention?
Yeah, so I like local charities. I like to kind of see where my time, energy, money is going. So the one that we're supporting right now is Casa Marianella. It's a refuge. It's a place where women and kids that are refugees that are seeking asylum in the United States can go and be safe. And my daughter's doing huge amount of volunteer work there. It's a really cool charity.
So we want to capture that in the show notes. And since you said it so perfectly, and I won't be able to actually spell it, after we're done, I'm going to ask you to text me with the correct spelling so we can put it in the show notes in case people want to donate.
Absolutely.
And is it in every major city, Holly, or is it local?
It's local. It's in Austin. Okay. I don't know that they may have sister chapters someplace else. I can find out.
Okay. Well, we'll do the same. And again, like John said, we'll post that in. Let me say my goodbyes first, and I'll have Johnny wrap us up. Holly, you are amazing. I just love the different perspectives you brought to our audience today. I learned a ton, and I can't thank you enough for spending time with us today. And any openings you have on the brand ambassador piece, the Kaplans are ready.
Awesome. Well, thank you.
Cap, I told you she was amazing, and Holly, you pulled it off. And, we're really, really grateful to have you. So thank you so much.
Oh, gratitude is all mine. You guys are amazing.
And thanks everyone for listening to another episode of The Revenue Builder.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. Be sure to check us out at forcemanagement.com.